And thank you for joining us for our October Development Industry Roundtable. I am excited to be talking about something incredibly important today to the future of Winter Haven, and that is our One Water Master Plan and planning for our development industry really in the future. This is really important subject matter that we're going to be talking about today. And I'm so glad that you all have joined us on the call or are taking the time to go back and watch the video afterwards. Well, John, do you want to kind of kick it off and give a little bit of an intro this morning?
Absolutely, be glad to, Katie, and thank you, Blake. And I'll be very brief because Blake has the really good stuff here today. And so we started the One Water Master Plan in the fall of 2019, and we're pretty far into it. And there are many planning elements to the master plan. One of the most important is what we're going to talk about here today. So there are other technical elements. The desire here today is to really focus in on the future land use portion of the One Water Master Plan, what that looks like, and to get your feedback today. And so that's really all I wanted to say. And thank you for the opportunity to present this to you today. And we want to get a constructive dialogue going around this. So with that, Blake, I'll turn it over to you. Blake is on the team for Black and Veatch, and we have really enjoyed working closely with them on this portion of the master plan. So that's really all I needed to say. And Blake, if you want to take it away, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, John. And for everybody that's watching, my name is Blake Drury. I'm Director of Master Planning and Urban Design here at GAI Consultants. And John's very kind to say that I've got this presentation here. It really came about with a whole lot of help from Wes Schaefer on our team and Pete Seckler, our leader of the Community Solutions Group. So this really is a group effort. I just get to present it to you today. And we really want to start with a story. And, you know, this is a story about growth and environmental impact. It's impact that depletes the aquifer and reduces our quality of life, and at the end of the day makes water really expensive. But I think with the efforts that the city has underway, we're starting to write a different ending to that story. It's still built on things that attract people to Winter Haven, the weather, the nature, the access and affordability. But in this story, instead of depleting our resources, we balance our resource budget. We know that if we withdraw more water from the aquifer than rainfall can recharge, then we're out of balance. And, you know, at one level, this could happen in less than 15 years. And if it does, it's going to have a big impact on industry and on growth and development. But on another level, we're already seeing effects on our lakes and wetlands, the places that drive a big piece of our community character and our quality of life. So, you know, how can we rebalance our water budget? Well, you know, really simply, we balance it by reducing how much we need to withdraw and the amount we waste, and by increasing storage and aquifer recharge. And the idea of storage and water and aquifer recharge, this really comes out as a land cover issue, and resolving these is the focus of our work on the team. But as John introduced, we're part of you know, this team of, I think, really bright people who are working on the strategy, and it really is an incredibly complicated issue. And we're tasked again with the parts that touch land use and land cover. And so I think this group today is a really good set of folks to listen and to you know, help us think about how we do this better in the future. So the task really has these three big parts. understanding the land and its relationship to water, understanding the dynamics of growth in Winter Haven, and then providing recommendations for policy changes to bring back the balance between water development and quality of life. So if you kind of squint at an aerial photo, which, you know, those of us in the business have probably done thousands of times, you know, you're going to notice that there really are just two basic kinds of land cover. There's green and blue cover. These are the natural landscapes that are pervious. And then there's gray cover, the rooftops, the streets, the plazas, the parking lots, and largely these aren't pervious. So both of these cover are important for the community. You know, the green and blue places, they filter and store and distribute water resources, you know, efficiently and cheaply. But gray cover supports community life. But in doing this, it also prevents aquifer recharge, and it induces runoff. So in Winter Haven, that story and the situation is a little bit more nuanced. You know, parts of the city's water service area have potential for high water recharge. You know, these areas shown in brown here. This is where the soils and the elevations allow for water to quickly recharge the aquifer. But most of this area is gray cover that disrupts recharge. Other parts of the area have potential for water storage, you know, where wetlands and floodplains allow for water to slowly seep into the aquifer. You can see that in green here. But again, many of these areas are in the path of development that affects potential storage areas. You know, and the dynamics of growth in Winter Haven are significant and complicated. According to the projections from Bieber from UF, the Winter Haven water service area is going to grow by more than 75,000 people in the next 50 years. And that growth is going to have to happen in both urban areas that are already built out and are largely gray cover, and in rural areas that are now mostly green and blue. And it's important to remember that when we're talking about growth, we're not just talking about homes, but we're talking about the places to work, to shop, to worship, to recreate, you know, all of these places that make Winter Haven a preferred location to live and do business. And these things, together with, you know, our lakes and our wetlands, are intrinsically connected to quality of life. So our mission, you know, within this framework is really to define ways to enhance the green and blue and to optimize the gray cover to enhance the quality of life. And, you know, that gives us a challenge for the way we design our community that really is twofold. You know, welcoming growth in a way that reduces imperviousness in high recharge areas and provides opportunities in areas to restore water storage in wetlands and floodplains. And notice that I said welcoming growth because at this point, not growing is not one of the options. Our only choice is to design a better community and a better structure for the way that we grow. So that means that we're going to focus on a couple of big things as we move forward. About, you'll hear us talk about a conservation network, about maybe doing some things to codes that that make compact and low impervious development more practical, and then connecting and activating the resources. The way that we do this really has to be place-based, and you know, I don't want to get too much into the planaries, but really what we mean is that our strategies have to be tuned differently in different types of areas. So, you know, we're going to talk about 3 different types of places, you know, about natural places where, as part of the strategy, we want to preserve and enhance the quality and the quantity of these backbone systems of the lakes and wetlands. These systems are wrapped in areas of infill and reinvestment, where we really think we have to retrofit land use and infrastructure policies and practices to renew green and blue systems. And then in areas of new growth, that green that we show on here, that is the areas with real potential for water storage. We think development has to create new green and blue systems to really maintain the integrity of the water cycle. So as part of our work, we have been thinking about how we make infill and reinvestment in the downtown core, in our retail corridors, and in our workplaces, both easier to do and more water sensitive. So we've looked at a series of different types of development to encourage in these places. And we've also thought about how new growth can happen in formats that allow density and create space for larger scale water facilities, which in these locations we really need to figure out how to have. So we've developed scenarios to test our ideas and to inform projections for the rest of the team for population and water usage. And really at the core of it, there's this business case that across the city, values are going to be enhanced by preserving open space and recharge areas, that we can make property ultimately more developable through doing this, that we can make sure that even smaller parcels have the capacity to develop and aren't burdened by the actions or sometimes the inactions of others, that values enhanced for some parcels improve overall values, and at the end of the day, that we're going to be able to enable lower rates for water. So our recommendations, again, that I want to go into a little bit more in depth about how we do this and what it might look like, are really threefold. That we create a primary conservation network, that we work through some revisions to the comp plan and the land development code to encourage compact and efficient development, both in infill areas as well as new growth areas, and then to really work hard on a trail system that can connect and activate people to these great resources that we have and that we're growing. So let's first talk about primary conservation network and what this really could be. It really is sort of this connected thing of wetlands and water bodies that does serve this more sort of utilitarian function of storage and filtration and flood protection. But I think, as you'll see, there's opportunity to influence and affect the way that development happens with and around the conservation network. And then we talk about coordination because this really is a public and private effort to get this onto the ground. So what do we mean when we say primary conservation network? So imagine, someplace in Winter Haven that has been developed up to this point for some agricultural purpose. We have lots of those, ringing the city. And, there are existing wetland systems. Sometimes they're fragmented, sometimes they're connected. That starts to be the backbone for the primary conservation network. But in some places, they're also public lands and places that are already set aside for protection and for these purposes. And so that really becomes sort of the initial operating segment, if you will, of this primary conservation network. So what you see is that still leaves a lot of land for development opportunities. And if you're thinking about how you develop this neighborhood, one of the things that you're going to need parks and trails and stormwater. So that can be additive to portions of the primary conservation network, sort of expanding this footprint a bit. Maybe there's a parkway system of roads that can connect throughout the region. And then as development happens, what we want to put forward is that, without having to look exactly in some form, stormwater and parks and other connections back to this conservation network can drive value for the entire neighborhood. Beyond that, adjacent to this conservation network, there might be opportunities for facilities for water storage, for instance. There may be opportunities for habitat preservation. And so at the end of the day, that primary conservation network can, in some places, take on a much larger footprint. Some places it might be smaller, but all of this really, we think, starts to serve some real functions from a water perspective in terms of storage and treatment and conveyance and flood management, but also have real value as a connected open space system that differentiates Winter Haven from other places within the region. When we talk about kind of how we might do development, one of the things that, if you go back to that idea of the dynamics of where do we fit 75,000 more people, well, that really has an implication that we have to develop a little more compactly. We have to have a more connected and safe transportation system. And that really, if we want this to happen, we need to look at the way that we regulate things and really try to see where we can be more flexible and where we can make things easier, particularly with respect to those infill and redevelopment areas where we're already in gray cover and we want to try to figure out how to be more efficient with that. So just at a sort of high level, you can see the kind of range of things that we might be talking about, and we've been working through some initial ideas with Eric Labby and Sean Byers at the city relative to some of these ideas and how they might get incorporated into things that they're already doing. Things from minimizing parking requirements, thinking about that sort of gray cover footprint, and is there a way to reduce it? Connecting people to parks, how we expand some density and FAR allowances, and how, at the end of the day, if we can get the right form, then maybe there's a streamlined approval process that could happen. And then, finally, we think that this idea that the city has been kind of nurturing over the years of this sapphire necklace, that a trail that actually connects and activates these places is really a game changer for the city. It's probably going to look different in different places, but the idea is that it could, serve a recreational and transportation benefit to the entire region. It might be within a park or a natural area. It might be, adjacent to a new roadway over on the east side of town. It might be a kind of multi-use trail that's part of some more urban streetscape. But the idea is that it connects and activates these places for the community. So in the next kind of 1 or 2 minutes that I have, I just want to talk about, what could this look like? In urban places that we know well, in downtown, for instance, how could we take a sort of functioning space, make it more aesthetically a part of the community, and maybe make it a thing that might spur some redevelopment around it as an address, together with connecting a trail through the area. So you see sort of the character that this could spur to extend some of the exciting redevelopment that we see downtown in the past few years. In broader sort of natural areas, is there a way to do some water treatment and storage functions, and maybe connect that with a recreational trail that gives people of all ages and abilities the chance to get out and get connected to this landscape. And then finally, as we think about new development, is there a way to do it in a fashion that makes water a more purposeful and functional part of a community amenity system that is tied together with this trail? And as with the beginning downtown image, really serves as an address for development to be an amenity for the community. So just to sort of cover the things that we've talked about, we have to figure out a way to balance our water budget. We're going to do this differently in the different place types that the community has, and we're going to focus on getting that conservation network about refining and skinning up the code and connecting things with the trail. So with that, Katie, that concludes our presentation, and if we have time for it, I'm happy to answer some questions, and if we need to sort of take things offline for the future, I think all of our team's happy to make ourselves available for that.
So because I've set this up as a Zoom meeting, there's a couple ways that participants can ask questions. You can drop it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. If it's easiest, you can raise your hand, or you can ask a question. I haven't seen any questions come into the chat window directly. If you have a question, you can drop it in there to everyone, or feel free to unmute yourself. And I know we've got a lot of technical folks on the call, as well as realtors. So feel free to start asking questions, guys.
Hey, first off, great job. Great graphics and great presentation. Certainly, if we can achieve this, it would put Winter Haven on a map. I know this Mike Britt's baby for many, probably decades. But the trick is going to be, did you, so how are you going to propose like overlay districts or something like that? So that, because the challenge on, one of many challenges is how to talk to a small piece of the puzzle when they come through the front door and want their plans turned around in 30 days. That usually is the recipe for why big visions like that can't get pulled off. But are you envisioning like some overlay districts where you maybe identify some of these trail, water systems and networks to kind of pull that off, so that everybody can know what the goal is, so everybody can bend a little bit?
So you're on to the first thing that we think needs to happen, is that we need to get this onto a map, so that you're exactly right. Like we don't have the luxury of having sites that are 15,000 acres and we can make big moves. We are in a position where we have systems that, cross sites that, you may touch a portion of it and, want to play your part, but if you don't know, you don't know and can't do it. And so I think that as Wes has been sort of working through some of the mechanics of it, yes, having some sort of an overlay that starts to define sort of a minimum segment, and then what are the benefits to a developer who does want to play along and do the right thing. If you build that park and that stormwater facility adjacent to the PCN, what's the benefit? Like what do you get in exchange? And we could spend all day talking about the benefits of giving someone density versus making them provide stuff in exchange for more density. But at the end of the day, having a system like that is something that we probably need to move closer to.
Yeah, just to reiterate that's going to be one of many tough parts. Is we can dream things all day and say, hey, this part of the city should do this and this part, but you got a bunch of private properties that the city doesn't control. If you have one or two property owners like right in the middle that just absolutely will not cooperate, it busts the plan. So
right,
delicate balance and a lot of public outreach, using relationships and trying to get these people on board with those overlays.
Yeah, and I think just to close the loop on this question, which Steve, I think is good despite your Penn State sign in the back. Just to sort of circle back, I think that in the example we showed, that's actually a project that that I designed and was part of years ago, and actually a lot of that area that we were showing is actually floodplain, which is a condition that we get in Winter Haven a lot. And I think the thing that we did and the developer sort of bought into was, how do you take the worst land and make it the best land? And it's not by necessarily filling it and putting houses on it. It's by turning it into a park and doing the things that you have to do already, like stormwater, in a way that becomes an amenity for the community rather than just a functional wet spot that you put in the back of some homes. So I think that sort of thought process is something that that we would certainly encourage throughout the city.
We did have a question come into the chat window. It seems that our lakes remain about 3 inches below where they used to be. Why don't we allow them to fill up to hold more water? I'm not sure who would want to take that one. And Joe, if you have anything you'd like to add to that, since you submitted that. To the chat.
And I meant 3 feet on
sorry,
some
3
lakes,
feet,
like Martha and Elbert and some others. But the chain itself is about 1.5 feet lower than its average, and it's just, why aren't we letting the lakes fill up higher to back to averages and hold more water in the city?
Hey, this is Mike Britt, but I'm probably the best one to answer that question. And good point on the lakes that aren't part of the chain. The southern chain especially has, I would say, is pretty much full, Joe. It's been full for a few years. We've had above normal rainfall, and they're about as full as they're ever going to get. Now, over there on the east side of town, Lake Elbert, Lake Otis, and that group, they fluctuate with the aquifer levels and aquifer pumpage and things like that. So, and we're very much aware that Winter Haven is located in a hydrologically impacted area. So, as most everybody knows on this call, this plan originated as a way to kind of restore the hydrology of the, help restore the hydrology of the region to ensure that our lakes are protected long term. I mean, if it wasn't for the lakes, I don't think we would be here talking about this today at all. So I thought Blake said this very well. If we're planning for the future of Winter Haven based on the place that we are and the benefits we want as a community, then we have to do something different. So and it's all related to lakes and aquifers and water and that kind of work. So I would say, without doing something different, you know, a lot of the lakes that aren't on the chain probably will fluctuate lower than normal. And even in drought conditions, even the southern chain, if you remember in 2001, 2007, we had the drought years and the chain basically dropped, you know, 4 or 5 feet. You know, we had canals that weren't navigable, that kind of stuff. And we could expect that again if we continue to do the same things we've always done. So this, I think, presents a really nice balance of how to grow and develop, and how to succeed as a community from an economic standpoint, but how to take care of water as well. So I think the planning team's put together some real good information here. Joe, did that answer your question? I don't know. I get moving along in different directions and not quite sure.
Well, I guess it did. I mean, you know, I thought that the southern chain was still below its historic levels of, like, was it like 131.5 or whatever like that. You know, however they gauge that. But, you know, the other lakes, I thought there was a spillover or something for drainage for those, but you're saying that there's not. It actually is just controlled by the aquifer underneath, Elbert, Martha, and those.
No, that they do have spillovers, but there really hasn't been as much water in those lakes to even spill over. So, okay, you know, at whatever point they don't reach their overflow capacity, then they are managed by the aquifer levels and, you know, pumpage, things like that. So, okay, yeah, they hadn't had as much water in them as the southern chain for sure.
And I do have just one other development to water question. And obviously I'm not, you know, opposed to development, but you know, I think all of us remember, you know, back when, you know, Cypress Gardens was, Dundee Road was flooded for months. It couldn't get into Cypress Wood. And that was, I think what I remember was because of just neglect to Peace Creek. And when we got into a really wet area, Peace Creek couldn't drain the water out. Now there's, you know, the Carlton Arms has been developed out there towards 27. There's a new development proposed out there, you know, on 27, which, you know, it seems like that's all been, you know, at one point or another underwater. Is there some way that they're going to be improving and expanding Peace Creek to be able to let the water flow out of those things as part of that development? How's that being proposed not to be flooded?
There again, I'm not sure if one of the consultant team wants to answer that question or if I should. So my answer would be that Peace Creek never was designed for flood control. It was designed for draining the landscape. So when State Road 542 flooded, they did come along and clean out the creek, which helped. But long term, the Peace Creek isn't really designed for flood control at all. And I think as we grow and develop, we can expect more problems along Peace Creek and more public investment. And really the way that kind of turns out long term is we have to get rid of more water to prevent flooding, which we don't want to do either. So, you know, it kind of, we're in an unsustainable kind of process here that we are trying to get out of. But the answer to the question is yes. Flood control long term will be managed better with like this long term plan if we get ahead of it now than it would be, you know, otherwise if future generations had to deal with it.
Joe, this is Gary Hubbard. I'm a director of Winter Haven Water and would like to expand a little bit on what Mike is talking about. We know that the Peace Creek Drainage Canal was developed pretty much just to move water away. The original flow path of Peace Creek was not along the drainage canal. So we've looked at where it was originally, and we asked DEO for a grant to look at flood mitigation along the US 27 corridor. And we did get a grant for $500,000 to study that area, how we would provide flood protection in that area. So part of the plan as envisioned would be to relocate Peace Creek Canal to take advantage of the natural systems that were there 100 years ago. So that area is under study right now with a consultant. So we are looking at ways to provide flood mitigation for that area and other areas. The idea is to provide additional storage in the systems around Winter Haven to help with that flood mitigation aspect.
What other questions do you all have? I know it's a lot of information that's been given to you this morning, so a lot of absorption happening right now.
I have a question about the new developments in regards to conservation, stuff like that. So I know we originally had a community that was going to be a green community that didn't develop the way that it was anticipated. But my question is, with the new developments, I see a couple of them. They're putting a retention pond in the front of it, and the retention ponds typically tend to be a little bit larger than what we've seen in most of the communities. So my first question was, is that part of the development and the water holding? Is that part of the plan with those developments? And then the second part of the question would be, most of these communities were cutting down trees, and we don't have a whole lot of trees in the new development, as opposed to some of the older communities that had trees and trees left in them to help add natural shade and beauty to the community. And is there a way to add more trees or leave trees in the new developments without, losing how many houses we can build?
Sure. So the answer to the first question about stormwater is, I think that, and without knowing exactly which developments and not wanting to maybe talk about specific developments, but in general, I think what we've identified is that there is the stormwater that's necessary to serve the community that you're building, but then there's also, especially over on the east side, a need for some larger areas in addition to that, that are part of this system that is holding water and letting it discharge at some rate that the engineers determine is going to help the function of Peace Creek and the aquifer and sort of the entire system. To the question about trees and how do we get more trees, I want to let Wes Schaefer on our team maybe have a stab in answering that, because one of the things that he's looked at in the code is how can we make a more significant sort of push for tree cover.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question. And I think to a large extent, new development provides an opportunity to increase tree canopy. Of course, we do see with new development, a lot of trees get cut down, but for the most part, a lot of our canopy was already cut down to make way for agriculture and agricultural uses and so forth. So I really see new development as an opportunity to restore tree canopy throughout Winter Haven. And in terms of code policies that can help do that, of course, we can start talking about street trees and the role that trees within the public right-of-way can play to not only add value to the quality of life of our public realm, but actually do work for us by slowing sort of the residents' time of water through our system, and trees actually store water as well to some extent. But I think outside of the public realm, we've looked at codes that require tree canopy, that require you using a credit system or just basically rating each native tree, based on canopy size or at full maturity. An overlay or a requirement that requires that as a part of development, you include tree canopy within the private realm. Moreover, we're considering open space requirements, which put people closer to parks, or put parks closer to people. And of course, as a part of that, tree canopy would be a component.
I could add to the stormwater question. One thing that we're considering is how could we establish a regional type stormwater system that would allow for permitting of development within the city. So in other words, a developer that has a small acreage and wants to develop commercial has a way to provide stormwater protection without doing anything on site. In other words, buying into a regional type system. So that's something that we're exploring. I believe there's some legislative hurdles that we would have to cross to get there, but I think we're going to head in that direction.
That makes sense. A lot of these communities are being built outside of technically the city limits in the county. Do you guys have any say or any conjunction with how things are built in the county areas that are outside of city limits?
Ryan, this is Gary Hubbard again. I guess I'll try to tackle that one. That is a difficult one. We don't have any strict say of what happens outside the city limits. But for example, there's a new development being proposed down in Lake Wales, and they've seen the sapphire necklace, the concept. They like the overall concepts that are being presented. So we're actually meeting with the town of Lake Wales and the developer to discuss how these concepts could be used outside the city of Winter Haven. I do think at some point in the future, we will need to have this discussion with the county folks also.
Thank you very much for that answer.
And to add to it, I think this goes back to Steve's question earlier, and the idea that if we don't get this on a map, then we can't explain it to anybody, and we can't either regulate it or lean on someone or just convince them until we can all see it. And that that is step one to moving ahead.
That makes sense.
So
Hey,
it may be, oh, go ahead, Gary, go ahead.
I can't agree more that we need to plant as many trees as we can as quickly as possible. But I just want to ask a specific question. The consultants had a beautiful picture of turning the huge FDOT dysfunctional retention pond downtown south of Avenue C into something nice and useful and beautiful. Is that a possibility of a real project, or we just dreaming there?
So I'll answer that. The concept came up a couple of years ago. We have a reclaimed water line that runs adjacent to that pond. That pond is owned by DOT. They are willing to deed that pond to the city in order that we maintain it. Now, of course, we have to meet the functions of the pond, the stormwater needs of the pond. But yes, that could be a real project. And as a matter of fact, we have engineering work already underway on how we could convert that dry pond to a wet pond. It could be a educational feature as well by showing how we use our reclaimed water as a method to recharge the aquifer. So it would have multiple purposes, but it is a very real project, and we anticipate that we'll see that moving forward in the next year or so.
Fantastic.
And Blake and team, I think it might be beneficial for the people on the call to know this is one of your kind of first putting this all out in public, in the public realm kind of presentations. So there is, and thank you for that. We're very honored that that you would come to the Chamber Development Group to talk about this first. But there are still other steps that you are looking at in terms of getting feedback on these plans, such as focus groups with actual land holders in the area and things of that nature. So maybe explain a little bit about what your next step processes are. You know, of course, the number one question I get is this a carrot or stick approach to these development plans? And then also, how do we hope to be able to get the money to help drive this plan forward and that sort of thing? But talk a little bit about what the next steps are for this project.
So I will start, and then I'll defer to John Dinges to talk about kind of One Water more broadly. But for our task related to land use, our next step is to provide some initial thoughts and concepts to the city relative to potential changes that they might make in the comp plan and land development code. And as everybody's probably aware, the comp plan has to be updated on a regular basis per the state statutes, and that process is already moving ahead. So there's sort of a little question about, are there things that we could do now on a process that's already moving, and then would there need to be a separate maybe suite of amendments that are directly specifically related to One Water? So the timing of that, I think, is not settled, but just conceptually, that's our next step. And then I think maybe John can talk a little more about One Water broadly.
Yeah, thank you, Blake. And what let me speak to the kind of the strategy around, you know, what does it take to get this system implemented and built? Which, of course, with the One Water Master Plan is a 50-year planning horizon. So there's plenty of time to implement, but we know time is of the essence, of course, because things are happening rapidly around us. So our approach to funding the Sapphire Necklace system is two prongs to that strategy, two primary prongs, and it's grounded in the idea that and the fact that building that system will have regional benefit. There's obviously benefit to Winter Haven, there's benefit to Polk County, but there's benefit even beyond that because it improves the water flow all the way down to the mouth of the Peace River. Based on that fact, the project, the Sapphire Necklace and One Water Master Plan, really are worthy of investment by the state of Florida and even perhaps the federal government. So we've engaged those conversations with agencies. So that's one prong, is looking for investment. The other is looking at public-private partnerships to help drive investment from the private sector and allowing the private sector to participate in creating these amenities for the benefit of the community. So I hope that provides just kind of a strategic answer to how we're approaching that.
And Katie, I'd like to say too, we knew at some point that we had to engage the community, and we appreciate this opportunity to come to this group this is the very first public briefing of the One Water Master Plan. We do have a very detailed communications plan in place. stakeholders that we will be engaging with, that will begin. This is the start of having that community discussion about water development. How do we make Winter Haven just a beautiful place to live and work? It's all about quality of life. And this is just beginning the community discussion. So you'll be seeing more events and discussions occurring throughout the community here in the next couple of months and through the spring of next year.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, and as I said to you on the call last week, it's just so exciting to see how proactive Winter Haven is being about planning for our future. You know, I told a story about how I get asked often why we don't have more parks on our lakes. And it goes back to, 50 years ago or even longer, how the city planned on how the land around the lakes was going to be used for private development or to keep some for the public realm. So to know that right now we're planning for 50 years in the future and really planting those seeds, I think is very important to the future of our community, and appreciate the efforts that are being put into this and the rockstar team that you've got working on this project. And as Gary mentioned, this is the first of many, many conversations to be had around this conversation. And my hope is for the people on the call, but you are all in the industry, every single one of you. This is the group that we need to talk to, but I know you run in circles of a lot of people that will need to hear this and will need to be involved in these conversations. So please, become ambassadors for getting people engaged in this conversation. We want to make sure that this is for the benefit of the entire community. As Blake said at the very beginning, growth is going to happen. It's, can we help form the way that growth is going to happen in a way that it benefits everybody, that it increases all of our property values and the quality of life of all of us in this community. So I think that's what, really is the goal around the amount of research and work you all have done on this plan up to this point to make it ready to be put out and to start to get that feedback and conversations from people in the general public, but people that really truly are working in this industry on a daily basis. Any other questions from the group?
Katie, I had just one more thought, just take it or leave it, but from a community buy-in standpoint, what this kind of reminds me of, there's a great park up in New Orleans, on the west side of New Orleans, that's like a curvilinear, and it's designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, which of course has Polk County roots with Bok Tower. This kind of curvilinear, not only greenway, but we're talking about like a blue way kind of thing where it's trails and water. That might be an interesting theme to look at, package it as something big running through the city. The city's got a great start with their trail system, but this might be another extension of it.
Stephen, this is Pete Seckler. I would say that as landscape architects on our side, we all study and learn about Frederick Law Olmsted and his influence on cities, through the development of, essentially the entire American landscape. And some of you may know the term emerald necklace in Boston. There is actually a place called the Emerald Necklace. It was conceived of and built as a constructed landscape to deal with wastewater, flood control, environmental management, and a whole series of other area problems and issues around an area of Boston called the Fens, which is now where Fenway Park is. And if you were to go to the Emerald Necklace today, you would see it as this unbelievable linear parkway that is both recreational, but also resource-based, water-based, environmentally based facility. And so I think just the nomenclature of calling this the Sapphire Necklace, when we entered into this project, that was immediately the thought that jumped to mind was the Emerald Necklace in Boston. It's like, okay, this is a big idea. It's about water, it's about environment, it's about constructing how we're going to manage these resources in a way that's thoughtful and also provides quality opportunities for development, but with a strong relationship to the natural environment, which everybody values. And you can see the legacy of that, 150 years later when you go to Boston. And what's really amazing is when you go back and you look at pictures, the old black and white pictures from the 1890s, when that thing was under construction. I believe it was the late 1800s, maybe early 1910s. It is a constructed landscape. And so for the folks that are concerned about trees and those sorts of things, what we envision is that by subtly and tactically working with the land that we have, the drainage patterns that we have, the natural areas that we have, we can create a landscape that will reinforce the functions of nature, but also create usable, attractive development opportunities to accept future growth in Winter Haven. And they will be on a regional amenity that will really be of statewide, if not national significance in terms of the way the whole union of built and natural environment is put together. But make no mistake, if you go to Boston, it is that emerald necklace is a constructed landscape there to solve water, environmental, and wastewater issues. And we can do that here in Winter Haven.
Well, and that's what we want people in 50, 75 years, 100 years to go. Is that sapphire necklace natural amenity? Or just like they ask us for the chain of lakes? I mean, that's a question we get all the time. And then you whip out the picture and show them people, probably to the chagrin of the EPA, carving canals and things of that nature. But, it's people, if we can create a level of pride around building a sapphire necklace and being that example and that showpiece of how you marry development with being focused on water sustainability and creating better tree cover and all that, if you can marry that, then you create the same amount of pride as Winter Havenites have about the chain of lakes. We're the chain of lake city, let's be the sapphire necklace trail city. I mean, you just create that amount of pride around it. Today, our Leadership Winter Haven group has their City of Winter Haven Day. And the one piece of feedback I always hear after this day is when they go to, Lake Howard Nature Park, or they go to Lake Hartridge, and they just think that the city randomly picked a site to build a park on. But they start to learn about how that's actually helping to reinfuse the aquifer, and it makes them think about things in a whole other way. So whether someone just cares about the fact that we have a lot of pretty parks and they love to ride their bike through these, or they understand it, it just creates a lot of community pride around that. And so really, this is the city diving all into stuff that they've already started to do, but looking at it on a more global or a more regional scale in terms of that. So, but I agree, Steve, that's a great point. Any other questions or comments before we close for the day? And any other announcements from the group? And Pete just put a link in there that I'll forward to everyone as well about the emerald necklace in Boston as well. So
Katie, I have one announcement.
Katie, I want to, this is, if I can, this is Merle. I just wanted to add, this is a great presentation, guys. This is really exciting. It almost makes me wish I'd have delayed my retirement and I was still there to be part of this. Almost.
Yeah, Merle, we got plenty of work.
I knew you were going to say that. But...
And Sean, I saw you wanted to say.
Yes, I know we're running out of time, but I did want to introduce, we got a new member of our staff. I did want to formally introduce him this morning, but I'd like to welcome Christopher Young, our new senior planner. So we get his face out there for everybody to meet this morning briefly.
Welcome, Chris.
Welcome, Chris.
Great. Hi.
Well, the one thing I'd like to say to our private sector friends that are with us today, thank you for having an open mind and being willing to listen to this tremendous initiative. I think can have a very positive impact on our city.
At some point, we're going to come back and have a discussion about how to pay for this. And so we'll be looking forward to your comments about that. And this is more of a fact check on my fact check on my part with Gary. Gary, the Rand Corporation, have they finished the economic impact of transitioning from the status quo development to the one water development? Is that finished?
Sorry, I was on mute. The Rand Corporation is developing basically a computer model that will be open-based to be used by entities around the United States and around the world. So they have completed the very initial evaluation of Sapphire and Necklace projects. And the early indication was that it was a positive cost benefit ratio. In other words, it was greater than 1. So there's many benefits associated with the development of the Sapphire Necklace. Some of those you've heard about today. Water storage for flood mitigation, water supply related to water that seeps into the aquifer for our use for future development. The general quality of life has a benefit. There are health benefits associated with the development of the Sapphire Necklace. So many of these things are done. The initial work is done. They are wrapping up the details of the computer model because it has a very comprehensive book to explain how to use the model. So that is underway and very close to completion.
Well, your mission, your challenge is going to be to make sure that when we get down to presenting that presentation, that it's got some walking around sense to it.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mike, this is Owen Beich at GAI. I think reflecting on what Gary says and what Blake says, almost any of those positive benefits can be calculated and monetized in some fashion eventually, if that becomes a choice you elect to pursue. And I think in general that's what Blake was describing.
Well, one of the comments that I had after the team presented to me last week is that I've asked our team to develop a slide. There needs to be a closing slide that says this. We need to see the return on investment. For example, if we do nothing, if we don't change anything and just stay with the status quo development practices, what does our future look like in terms of the further degradation of the wetland system, the lake levels, water supply, that sort, and the impact on our overall ecosystem. And then compare that to if we put some new practices in place involving one water, what does that horizon look like? I think we have to see the comparison between the two because they're two different paradigms. And I think that's important to be added as part of the discussion. Thank you.
Well, there was one comment dropped in that I do want to call out, and Joe gave kudos to Mike Britt for really championing water. When I started in this job, Mike Britt was one of my first meetings, and he came in and explained to me the importance of water and to our community. And then shortly after, Swift Mud and the county and Central Florida Partnership and everybody wanted to talk about the importance of water. And at that time, a Central Florida partnership survey of 1,000 people, only 1% felt like water was an issue going forward. I don't think if you ask that same question today, you would get that same answer. I think especially in the Winter Haven community, there is just so much greater of an understanding about the importance of water to not just our quality of life, but to future development, to just the way we are able to live our daily lives. And a lot of that is attributed to Mike Britt pushing very, very hard over his career for this, but then the city listening and moving forward, and the city and Gary and his team aggressively going after grants. And you know, if you explain to the people of the city of Winter Haven that you've not had to pay for as much of this, for much of this, because of the grants we're seeking outside of our community with the state and federal grants, I mean, that's a huge piece of this. So kudos to the team on here. It's got to be a dream to see all of this start to be painted out on paper. And Mike, I'll give it to you to make the closing comments there on that. Mike Britt and Mike Herr.
Well, thanks everybody for the attention. I appreciate that very much. And as y'all all know, it's been a labor of love on my part. So, you know, it's I'm certainly, I feel blessed that we have such a great community that's been willing to listen and be open-minded. And then it all translates now to the great team we've assembled here. And now y'all see why this has been such a great process. We have a magnificent team assembled looking at all these issues, and now you're seeing the results of that. So it is very exciting. And, you know, going back to Katie, and I've said this so many times, this really started with the Chamber of Commerce in 2000 when we did the vision process. So, you know, I was just a recipient of that at the time. So it certainly opened my mind up about how important water was to the community. So, you know, it's just been nice to give back, and nice that the community supported kind of this effort up to now. And now we have the hard part to do. You know, moving forward is going to be difficult for sure. So it's going to be fun.
Very good. All right, team. Well, thank you so much for spending so much time with us this morning. Like I said, I'll send this out, recording out with the technical glitches edited out so it's more streamlined, and we will go from there. So again, thank you all so much for being a part of this conversation today. And please continue to be, as we get the best package of recommendations before us to drive this community forward. So thank you and have a good one.